At 42, he had built an empire from absolutely nothing. An empire that employed over 300 people and held contracts with half the Fortune 500 companies in the state. The scars on his knuckles told stories of the streets where he'd grown up, but the tailored suits and commanding presence spoke of the man he'd become. The framed photo on his desk showed a different time. Him with Linda and their two children, Emma and Tyler, taken 3 years ago during their vacation in the Hamptons. Linda's blonde hair caught the sunlight, her smile perfect and practiced. She'd always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads in restaurants and made other men envious. But Rob had learned long ago that beauty could be the most dangerous weapon of all. His secure phone buzzed. Danny Kowalski's gravelly voice came through the encrypted line. "Rob, it's happening tonight." She made the call to her lawyer an hour ago. Patricia Donnelly's office confirmed they're filing tomorrow morning. Rob leaned back in his leather chair, unsurprised. For the past 3 months, he'd been watching his wife of 18 years orchestrate what she believed would be his downfall. Linda had no idea that Morrison Security's most advanced surveillance equipment had been monitoring her every move, every phone call, every clandestine meeting with Trevor Walsh at the downtown athletic club. "Right on schedule," Rob said, his voice calm as still water. "And the kids?" "Emma's at her friend's house for the weekend. Tyler's at soccer camp. Linda planned this perfectly, or so she thinks." Rob had met Linda Phillips 20 years ago when he was just starting his business, working 18-hour days to build something from the nothing he'd inherited from his alcoholic father. Linda was finishing her marketing degree at the university, the daughter of old money who'd been attracted to his raw ambition and dangerous edge. Her parents had disapproved, but Linda had a rebellious streak that found Rob's rough background exciting. The irony wasn't lost on him now. She'd married him for the thrill of slumming with a street kid made good, but had grown to resent the very qualities that had built their fortune. Over the years, as Rob's business flourished and his reputation in the security world became legendary, Linda had retreated into a world of country club lunches and charity galas, surrounding herself with people who whispered that she could have done better. "Danny, remember what I told you about forgiveness? That it's a luxury you can't afford in war," Danny replied. They'd served together in the army before Rob started his business, and Danny had been his second-in-command ever since. If Rob was the sword, Danny was the shield, loyal, brutal when necessary, and absolutely merciless to anyone who threatened their brotherhood. Exactly. And this is war. The midnight call came precisely as Rob had predicted. He was in his home office, reviewing the final preparations for what Linda believed would be her victory. The house was a testament to Rob's success. 6,000 square feet of custom architecture in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Linda had insisted on every luxury, every upgrade, believing it was her right as his wife. The call came at midnight. "My wife. I've filed for divorce. The house is mine. Security will escort you out tomorrow." I calmly said, "Understood." Then I made one phone call from my contacts. Linda's voice was cold, triumphant. She'd clearly rehearsed this moment, savoring what she believed was her checkmate move. "Robert, I've filed for divorce. The house is mine. Security will escort you out tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rob set down his whiskey glass, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Understood." The line went dead. Linda had probably expected screaming, pleading, or threats. Instead, she got the same calm professionalism that had made Rob legendary in his field. In the silence that followed, Rob picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he'd been saving for this exact moment. "Michael Torres speaking." "Michael, it's time. Execute Phase 1. Michael Torres wasn't just any lawyer. He was a legal predator who specialized in high-stakes divorce cases where the gloves came off completely. While Linda had chosen Patricia Donnelly, a society lawyer known for her connections and her ability to charm judges, Rob had selected a man who fought in the shadows and never lost. By morning, her lawyer was screaming, "You have no legal rights to do that to her." Chapter 2. The Making of a Predator. Rob Morrison hadn't been born with a silver spoon. He'd forged his own from the brass knuckles of necessity. Growing up in the Riverside district, where broken glass littered the sidewalks and police sirens were the neighborhood lullaby, Rob learned early that the world was divided into predators and prey. His father, Frank Morrison, had been a construction worker whose paycheck disappeared into bottles of cheap whiskey, leaving young Rob to fend for himself and his sickly mother. At 16, Rob was already 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet intensity that made even grown men step aside. He worked construction jobs after school, saved every penny, and dreamed of something bigger than the cycle of poverty that had claimed his father. When his mother died of cancer during his senior year, unable to afford proper treatment, Rob made a promise over her grave that would define the rest of his life. Never again would anyone take what was his. The army had given him discipline and purpose. More importantly, it had introduced him to Danny Kowalski, a Chicago kid who'd enlisted to escape his own demons. They'd served 2 tours together, watching each other's backs in places where trust meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. When Rob decided to start Morrison Security Solutions, Danny was his first and only call. "You sure about this, Morrison?" Danny had asked, standing in the empty warehouse that would become their first office. "Starting a security business with guys like us. Guys like us understand what real security means," Rob had replied. "We've seen what happens when people let their guard down." The business had grown through reputation and results. Rob didn't just provide security guards. He offered complete protection services, corporate espionage detection, private investigations, and specialized consulting for clients who needed problems solved quietly and permanently. His team was composed of ex-military, former cops, and specialists who understood that sometimes the law was more of a guideline than a rule. Linda had entered his life during year 3, when Morrison Security was finally turning serious profit. She'd been working at a marketing firm that handled one of his corporate clients, and their first meeting had been electric. She was everything he wasn't: polished, educated, connected to a world of privilege that had always been closed to him. But she'd been drawn to his intensity, his success, and perhaps most importantly, his absolute refusal to apologize for who he was. Their courtship had been passionate and intense. Linda had thrilled at dating someone dangerous, someone her parents whispered about in worried tones. Rob, for his part, had been captivated by her sophistication and beauty. She'd made him want to be better, to build something worthy of a woman like her. The wedding had been Linda's dream affair: 300 guests at the country club, an orchestra, and enough flowers to stock a greenhouse. Rob had gone along with it, understanding that image mattered in the world he was building. But even then, he'd noticed how Linda's friends looked at him, polite smiles hiding barely concealed condescension. Over the years, as Rob's business expanded and his wealth grew, Linda had settled into a role that seemed perfect from the outside. She'd become the ideal corporate wife: beautiful, charming, involved in all the right charities. But Rob had begun to sense her growing resentment. The boy from Riverside had never quite disappeared from his voice, his mannerisms, his approach to business. Linda wanted a husband who belonged in her world completely, not one who'd clawed his way in. The children had changed everything. Emma, now 16, was Linda's mini-me, blonde, beautiful, and already showing signs of her mother's entitlement. Tyler, 14, was more like Rob, quiet, observant, with an intensity that suggested he understood more than he let on. But Rob had failed to see how completely Linda had poisoned his own children against him until it was almost too late. The surveillance on Linda had begun 6 months ago when Rob noticed subtle changes in her behavior. Later nights, new clothes, a secretiveness that set off every alarm bell his profession had taught him to hear. Danny had been reluctant at first. "Rob, you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." "I've never been able to afford ignorance," Rob had replied. "And I won't start now." The evidence had been devastating and complete. Linda wasn't just having an affair, she was planning to destroy him. Trevor Walsh, her personal trainer and lover, was little more than a weapon she'd chosen for his youth, his looks, and his complete lack of moral boundaries. Together, they'd been planning Rob's financial and social destruction for months. Now, as Rob sat in his office reviewing the surveillance files one last time, he felt the familiar calm that came before violence. Linda had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd married. The boy from Riverside had never forgotten the most important lesson of the streets. When someone comes for what's yours, you don't just defend. You destroy. Chapter 3. The Affair Deepens. Trevor Walsh had always been beautiful in the way that made women stupid and men envious. At 28, He possessed the kind of sculpted physique that came from professional training and genetic gifts, combined with the easy charm of someone who'd never had to work for anything in his life. He drifted through college on a swimming scholarship, then into personal training when his Olympic dreams fizzled along with his work ethic. The Riverside Athletic Club was his hunting ground, where bored housewives with too much money and too little attention from their husbands paid premium rates for his services. Trevor had perfected the art of the sympathetic ear, the understanding smile, the perfectly timed touch that suggested possibility without crossing lines, until the client was ready to cross them herself. Linda Morrison had been different from his usual targets. She was older, more sophisticated, and married to a man who everyone whispered about in hushed tones. Robert Morrison's reputation preceded him. Stories of corporate executives who'd crossed him and mysteriously found themselves under federal investigation, of competitors who'd tried to steal his contracts and ended up bankrupt. But Linda had been insistent, and Trevor had been intrigued by the challenge. "He doesn't see me anymore," Linda had confided during their third training session, her hand lingering on his arm as he adjusted her form. 20 years of marriage, and I'm invisible to him." Trevor had fed her the lines she wanted to hear about being underappreciated, about deserving better, about how a woman like her should be worshipped. It was a script he'd perfected, and Linda had fallen for it completely. But as their affair deepened, Trevor began to realize he'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple infidelity. Linda hadn't just wanted sex and attention, she'd wanted revenge. Her complaints about Rob had revealed a woman consumed by resentment, someone who'd grown to hate the very success she'd once found attractive. She'd made it clear that their affair was just the beginning of her plan to destroy her husband completely. "He thinks he's so smart," Linda had whispered during one of their afternoon encounters at Trevor's apartment. "But he has no idea what's coming. I'm going to take everything, the house, the business, the children. I'll leave him with nothing." Trevor had encouraged her fantasies, partly from genuine dislike of Rob Morrison's intimidating presence, but mostly because Linda had promised him a future that included her divorce settlement. She'd painted pictures of them traveling together, of him managing her finances, of a life funded by Rob's destruction. But Trevor was beginning to suspect that Linda had no idea who she was really dealing with. The plan Linda had hatched with her lawyer, Patricia Donnelly, was elegant in its simplicity. Donnelly was well-connected in the city's legal circles, known for her ability to navigate high-society divorces with discretion and favorable outcomes for her clients. She'd assured Linda that with proper documentation of Rob's emotional absence and evidence of his intimidating behavior, combined with Linda's role as primary caregiver to the children, the settlement would be overwhelming in her favor. "Men like your husband," Donnelly had explained, "are used to winning through force and intimidation. But the family court system protects women from exactly that kind of behavior. We'll paint him as an absent workaholic who cares more about his business than his family." Linda had been planning the midnight call for weeks, timing it for when the children would be away and Rob would be caught completely off guard. She'd arranged for private security, ironically, not Rob's company, to escort him from the house the following morning. She'd already changed the locks and transferred money to accounts Rob couldn't access. What Linda didn't know was that every detail of her plan had been anticipated. The morning after the midnight call arrived gray and cold. Linda stood in the kitchen of her soon-to-be former marital home, sipping coffee and waiting for the satisfaction of watching Rob's humiliation. She dressed carefully, a simple black dress that suggested mourning for her marriage while showing enough leg to remind everyone what Rob was losing. Trevor had stayed the night, a deliberate provocation. He was upstairs showering, singing off-key with the confidence of someone who believed he'd won. Linda smiled at the sound, imagining Rob's face when he realized the full scope of her betrayal. At exactly 9 o'clock, 3 black SUVs pulled into the circular driveway. Linda frowned. She'd arranged for 2 security guards, not a convoy. Her confusion deepened when she recognized the lead vehicle as one of Rob's company cars. The doorbell rang precisely once. Linda opened it to find not the private security team she'd hired, but Danny Kowalski flanked by 4 men in expensive suits. Danny's scarred face wore an expression of polite professionalism that somehow managed to be more threatening than any scowl. "Mrs. Morrison," Danny said, his voice flat and emotionless, "we're here to escort you from the premises." "What?" Linda stepped back, confusion replacing her confident smile. There's been a mistake. I'm not the one leaving. Where are my security guards? They received a better offer, Danny replied, stepping into the foyer uninvited. Mr. Morrison's lawyer would like to speak with you. Michael Torres emerged from the SUV like a well-dressed shark scenting blood. He was smaller than Rob, impeccably groomed, with the kind of predatory smile that defense attorneys wore in courtrooms. Behind him came Patricia Donnelly, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. Linda, Donnelly called out, her voice strained. We need to talk. Now. Torres approached the front door with casual confidence. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Michael Torres, representing your husband in this divorce proceeding. I have some documents you'll want to see. He handed her a thick manila envelope. Linda's hands shook as she opened it, her eyes scanning legal documents that made no sense at first glance. Then the words began to register. Adultery, fraud, conspiracy to commit, asset forfeiture. You have no legal rights to do that to her. Donnelly was screaming into her phone, but Torres just smiled wider. Actually, Torres said calmly, we have every legal right. And this is just the beginning. Upstairs, Trevor's singing had stopped. Chapter 4, The War Begins. Patricia Donnelly had built her career on discretion, connections, and the assumption that wealthy women would always have the advantage in divorce proceedings. She specialized in representing wives of powerful men, and her track record was impressive, until she received the call at 7:30 that morning that shattered her confidence completely. Ms. Donnelly, this is Judge Catherine Hernandez's clerk. The emergency motion filed by Michael Torres has been granted. All assets are frozen pending investigation, and Mrs. Morrison is to be served immediately. Donnelly had raced to her office, her mind spinning as she tried to understand how Rob Morrison had outmaneuvered her so completely. She'd underestimated him, thinking of him as just another wealthy businessman who'd crumble under the pressure of public scandal and legal maneuvering. But the documents Torres had filed revealed a level of preparation that was both impressive and terrifying. Rob had known about the affair for months. Not only known about it, but documented it with surveillance footage, recorded phone calls, and financial records that painted Linda's infidelity as part of a broader conspiracy to defraud him. Worse, Torres had uncovered evidence that Linda had been systematically transferring marital assets to hidden accounts, planning what legally constituted theft. When Donnelly arrived at the Morrison house and saw her client's face, she knew the war was already lost. How is this possible? Linda demanded, waving the legal documents like weapons. You said the house was mine. You said the children would choose me. You said. I said a lot of things before I knew who we were dealing with, Donnelly interrupted. Linda, your husband isn't just any businessman. Morrison Security Solutions handles sensitive work for people who don't accept failure. He's been planning this longer than we've been planning anything. Inside the house, Trevor Walsh had finally come downstairs, his earlier confidence replaced by naked fear. The man who'd swagger through Linda's stories about her intimidating husband now found himself face-to-face with Danny Kowalski, who looked like he could break Trevor in half without breaking a sweat. Mr. Walsh, Danny said pleasantly, Mr. Morrison would like a word with you. Trevor glanced toward Linda, looking for support that wasn't coming. Linda was too busy arguing with her lawyer to notice her lover's predicament. Danny's smile grew wider at Trevor's obvious panic. Don't worry, Danny continued. It's just a conversation. For now. The phrase hung in the air like a threat. Rob Morrison arrived at 11 o'clock, stepping out of his armored Mercedes with the casual confidence of a man who owned the battlefield. He wore a dark gray suit that emphasized his imposing frame, and his expression was completely unreadable. Linda felt a chill as she watched him approach. This wasn't the husband she'd lived with for 18 years. This was the predator who'd built an empire from nothing. Linda, Rob said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded storms. Trevor. He turned to Torres. Counselor, I trust everything is proceeding smoothly? Like clockwork, Torres replied. The restraining order is in effect, the assets are frozen, and the criminal investigation has been opened. Mrs. Morrison will need to vacate the premises within the hour. Linda found her voice. Criminal investigation? What criminal investigation? Rob's smile was colder than winter. The one into your conspiracy to defraud me, dear. You see, when you systematically transfer marital assets to hidden accounts while planning to divorce me, that's called theft. When you conspire with your lover to do it, that's called conspiracy. When you use lies and manipulation to try to steal my children's inheritance, that's called fraud. I never, Linda began. You did, Rob interrupted, producing a tablet and pressing play. His own voice filled the air, along with Linda's and Trevor's, recorded in intimate detail as they planned his financial destruction. Every conversation, every meeting, every plan. I've been watching and listening for months. Trevor tried to speak. Look, Mr. Morrison, this isn't what it looks like. Rob turned his attention to the younger man, and Trevor instinctively stepped backward. It looks like you seduced my wife as part of a plan to steal my money. It looks like you thought you could take what I built with your pretty face and gym muscles. Danny moved closer to Trevor, who was now visibly sweating despite the cool morning air. Rob continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. I've spent 20 years building something from nothing. I've protected it from corporate raiders, from federal investigations, from business rivals who thought they could take what was mine. Did you really think I wouldn't protect it from you? Linda was crying now, mascara streaking down her face as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The children, she whispered. You can't take the children. I'm not taking them, Rob replied. You're losing them. There's a difference. Torres handed Rob another folder. The custody evaluation has been expedited given the criminal charges. Emma and Tyler will be interviewed this afternoon. For the first time, real fear crept into Linda's voice. Emma will choose me. She's always chosen me. Rob's expression didn't change. We'll see. As if summoned by mention of their names, a car pulled into the driveway. Emma Morrison stepped out, her blonde hair catching the morning light, looking every inch her mother's daughter. But her expression as she approached the house was harder than Linda had ever seen it. Mom, Emma said, her voice flat and emotionless. We need to talk. Chapter 5. The Poison Spreads. Emma Morrison had always been her mother's favorite, a fact that Linda had never bothered to hide. At 16, Emma possessed her mother's beauty and her father's intelligence, a combination that should have made her formidable. But Linda had spent years poisoning her daughter against Rob, filling Emma's head with stories about her father's cold nature and his obsession with business over family. The strategy had worked, until Emma discovered the truth. I know about Trevor, Emma said without preamble, her blue eyes fixed on her mother with an intensity that reminded everyone present exactly whose daughter she was. I know about the money you've been stealing. I know about everything. Linda's face went white. Emma, sweetheart, you don't understand. I understand that you're a liar. Emma cut her off. Tyler and I came home early from our trips yesterday. We heard you and Trevor laughing about how you were going to destroy Daddy financially, and how you'd convince us to testify against him in court. Trevor tried to interrupt. Emma, your mother was just. Shut up? Emma snapped, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the grown man immediately. You don't get to talk to me. You don't get to talk to my family. You're nothing but a gold-digging parasite who thought he could steal from my father. Rob watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and sadness. Emma had inherited his ability to see through people's lies, but Linda's poison had run deep. The fact that his own daughter had initially been willing to participate in his destruction would be something he'd never forget or forgive. Tyler appeared from around the corner of the house, having been dropped off by his soccer coach. At 14, he was quieter than his sister, but equally perceptive. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, took in the scene with careful assessment. Dad, Tyler said simply, walking directly to Rob's side without acknowledging his mother or Trevor. The gesture was small, but devastating. Linda had been so focused on Emma's loyalty that she'd failed to secure Tyler's. Worse, she'd underestimated how much her younger child had observed and understood about her plotting. Tyler, Linda pleaded, you don't understand what's happening here. I understand that you hate Dad, Tyler replied, his young voice carrying surprising steel. I understand that you've been stealing money and cheating on him. I understand that you were planning to lie about him in court and try to make Emma and me lie too. Danny Kowalski watched the family drama unfold with professional interest. He'd seen Rob in countless dangerous situations, but this was different. This was personal in a way that made it infinitely more dangerous for everyone involved. Trevor, meanwhile, was beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something far beyond a simple affair. The family he'd helped tear apart wasn't just wealthy. They were intelligent, organized, and absolutely ruthless when threatened. Emma's transformation from potential ally to cold-eyed enemy had been swift and complete, while Tyler's quiet support of his father suggested depths the young man had kept hidden. Patricia Donnelly pulled Linda aside, her voice urgent and low. "We need to leave. Now. And you need to understand that this situation has moved far beyond a simple divorce proceeding." "What do you mean?" Linda asked, though part of her already knew. "I mean your husband has turned this into a war, and he's winning every battle. The criminal charges are real, Linda. The evidence is overwhelming. And now your own children are testifying against you." Linda looked back at Emma and Tyler, searching for any sign of the children who'd once loved her unconditionally. Emma's face was a mask of disappointment and disgust, while Tyler simply looked through her as if she were a stranger. "This isn't over," Linda said, though her voice lacked conviction. Rob heard her and smiled. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." Michael Torres approached with another set of documents. "Mrs. Morrison, you're being served with additional papers. Fraud charges, conspiracy charges, and a restraining order that keeps you and Mr. Walsh away from any Morrison properties or business interests. Including this house," Danny added helpfully, "which you need to vacate in the next 30 minutes. Trevor finally found his voice. "You can't do this. This is harassment. This is legal," Rob interrupted. "This is what happens when you try to steal from someone who's better at this game than you are." As if choreographed, Rob's phone buzzed. He answered it without taking his eyes off Trevor. "Morrison." A pause. "Excellent. Yes, proceed with phase 2. Another pause. "No, no mercy. They made their choice." He hung up and turned to Danny. "Trevor's gym membership has been revoked. His lease has been terminated. His car has been repossessed." Trevor's face went from pale to gray. "What? You can't." "I can," Rob said simply. "I own the building where your gym is located. I hold the mortgage on your apartment complex. And I bought your car loan from the bank this morning." Danny's smile was predatory. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have money, connections, and absolutely no conscience about using them." Linda stared at her husband in horror, finally understanding the man she'd underestimated. "You're destroying him over an affair?" "I'm destroying him because he tried to destroy me," Rob corrected. "The affair was just his weapon of choice. This is mine." Emma stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mom, just stop. You lost. We all lost because of what you did. Don't make it worse." But Linda's humiliation was turning to rage, and rage made people stupid. "You think you've won? You think you can just erase 20 years of marriage? I'll fight this. I'll tell everyone what kind of man you really are." Rob's expression didn't change. "Linda, you've already told everyone exactly what kind of woman you are. And after today, no one will care what you have to say about me." He gestured to Danny. "Make sure they're off my property in 20 minutes. If they're still here after that, call the police." As Rob walked toward his car, Tyler fell into step beside him. Emma hesitated for a moment, looking back at her mother one last time, then followed her father and brother. Linda Morrison was left standing in the driveway of the house she'd planned to steal, watching her family walk away from her forever. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. Trevor Walsh had always relied on his looks, charm, and the generosity of wealthy women to coast through life. He'd never been particularly intelligent, ambitious, or capable of long-term planning. These shortcomings had served him well in his chosen profession. Personal training for bored housewives required little more than a pretty face and the ability to feign interest in their problems. But now, sitting in his car outside what used to be his apartment building, Trevor was beginning to understand that he'd made the kind of enemy who didn't just win, he destroyed completely. The eviction notice was taped to his door, effective immediately. His belongings had been moved to storage, the location of which would be provided pending resolution of outstanding debts. His car, a leased BMW that he'd used to project success, was gone, repossessed while he'd been at the Morrison house watching his world collapse. Trevor's phone buzzed with text messages from other clients canceling their training sessions. Then came the call from his manager at the athletic club. "Trevor, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go. Effective immediately." "What? Why? I haven't done anything wrong. The club's membership committee received some disturbing information about your personal conduct. We can't have trainers who engage in inappropriate relationships with married clients." Trevor's blood went cold. "Who told you that?" I'm not at liberty to say, but the evidence was quite comprehensive. Security footage, witness statements, documentation of financial irregularities. I'm sorry, Trevor, but this is a business decision. As the call ended, Trevor realized that Rob Morrison hadn't just fired a single shot. He'd launched a comprehensive campaign designed to destroy every aspect of Trevor's life. The man wasn't just wealthy and connected. He was methodical, thorough, and absolutely without mercy. Linda wasn't faring much better. The hotel she'd checked into had mysteriously lost her reservation, claiming their computer system had been hacked. Her credit cards were being declined at every restaurant and store she tried. Her friends from the country club weren't returning her calls. By evening, Linda found herself in a budget motel on the outskirts of town, her designer luggage looking ridiculous in the cramped, dingy room. Patricia Donnelly had called twice, each conversation more desperate than the last. Linda, we need to consider a plea agreement. The federal charges are serious, and your husband has evidence going back months. If we don't cooperate, you could be looking at prison time. Prison? Linda's voice cracked. For what? Having an affair? For fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. You transferred over $200,000 to accounts in Trevor's name, Linda. That's not infidelity. That's theft. The truth was, Linda had been so focused on hurting Rob that she'd ignored the legal implications of her actions. She'd convinced herself that she was entitled to the money, that it was her compensation for 20 years of marriage to a man who loved his business more than his family. But now, faced with the reality of criminal charges, she was beginning to understand how completely she'd miscalculated. Meanwhile, Rob Morrison sat in his office reviewing the day's progress with Danny Kowalski. The operation had proceeded flawlessly, each move calculated to maximum effect. Trevor's completely isolated, Danny reported. No job, no apartment, no car, no clients. His bank accounts are frozen pending the fraud investigation, and his gym buddy friends are keeping their distance now that they know he's radioactive. Good, Rob replied. What about Linda? She's burned through most of her cash trying to find decent accommodations. The restraining order means she can't access any of the joint accounts, and her personal accounts are tied up in the investigation. She's effectively broke. Rob nodded with satisfaction. And the children? Emma's staying with her friend Sarah for a few days while she processes everything. Tyler's home with you. Neither one has tried to contact their mother. This was the part that should have caused Rob some sadness, the destruction of his children's relationship with their mother. But Linda had made her choice when she tried to turn Emma and Tyler against him. She'd weaponized his own children in her war against him, and that was something Rob would never forgive. Emma Morrison sat in her friend Sarah's bedroom, staring at her phone. She'd recorded her mother's conversation with Trevor the previous week, the one where they'd laughed about destroying her father and discussed how to manipulate her and Tyler into testifying against him. At the time, she'd been torn between loyalty to her mother and revulsion at what she was hearing. The decision had been easier once she'd seen the surveillance footage her father's security team had compiled. Months of evidence showing her mother's affair, her theft, her lies. Evidence showing Trevor encouraging Linda to take Morrison for everything he's worth and promising to help her hide the stolen money. Emma had always known her father was dangerous in business, but she'd never seen that danger turned on his own family before. Watching Rob systematically destroy her mother and Trevor had been both impressive and terrifying. It was like watching a master chess player demolish amateurs who thought they were playing checkers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Are you okay? She typed back, no, but I will be. Is Dad okay? He's quiet. I think he's sad about Mom, but he won't say it. Emma believed that. Her father might be ruthless in protecting what was his, but he genuinely loved their mother once. Linda's betrayal hadn't just been financial or sexual. It had been a complete rejection of everything Rob had built for their family. The worst part was that Linda had never even tried to work things out. She'd gone straight to destruction, to theft, to using her own children as weapons. She'd chosen nuclear war when she could have chosen divorce mediation. Now she was paying the price for that choice. At midnight, Trevor Walsh stood outside a 24-hour diner, counting the last of his cash. $17.38. His phone had been disconnected for non-payment. His credit cards were maxed out and frozen, and he had nowhere to sleep except his car, which had been repossessed. He'd called his brother in Phoenix, but the conversation had been brief and unproductive. Jesus, Trevor, what did you do? There are federal agents asking questions about you. Something about money laundering and conspiracy. I can't help you with this. Don't call here again. Trevor was beginning to understand that Robert Morrison's revenge wasn't just personal, it was total. The man wasn't content to win the divorce or even to destroy the affair. He was systematically eliminating every aspect of Trevor's existence, turning him into a ghost who'd never existed. As Trevor sat in the diner, nursing a cup of coffee he couldn't afford, he made a decision that would prove to be his final mistake. He was going to fight back. Chapter 7. The Master Plan Unfolds. Rob Morrison had learned long ago that true power wasn't about the ability to destroy your enemies. It was about making them destroy themselves. As he sat in his office 3 days after the divorce papers were filed, watching surveillance footage of Trevor Walsh's pathetic attempts to rebuild his life, Rob felt the satisfaction of a job well done. But this was only the beginning. Danny Kowalski entered the office carrying a thick folder. Phase 3 is ready to execute. Are you sure you want to go this far? Rob looked up from his computer screen, his expression unreadable. Danny, 20 years ago, I made a promise to myself that I would never let anyone take what I built. Linda and Trevor didn't just try to steal my money. They tried to steal my children, my reputation, my life's work. There is no too far when someone comes for everything you are. Danny nodded, understanding. They'd been through wars together, literal and figurative, and he knew that when Rob reached this level of cold determination, mercy wasn't just off the table. It was a foreign concept. What about the kids? Danny asked. This next phase is going to get ugly. Emma's made her choice. Tyler never wavered. They understand that some betrayals can't be forgiven. Rob's voice was matter of fact, but Danny caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Losing his family had hurt Rob more than he'd ever admit, but that pain had transformed into something far more dangerous. The plan Rob had constructed was elegant in its cruelty. Phase 1 had been immediate destruction, taking away Linda and Trevor's financial stability and social standing. Phase 2 had been isolation, cutting them off from friends, family, and support systems. Phase 3 would be psychological warfare designed to break them completely. Trevor Walsh was about to learn what happened when someone tried to steal from a man who'd spent his entire career studying human weakness. Trevor had found temporary shelter at a homeless facility downtown, a reality that should have been humbling but instead had filled him with rage. He'd spent the last 3 days plotting his revenge against Rob Morrison, convinced that he could find a way to hurt the man who destroyed his life. His plan was amateur hour compared to Rob's methodical approach. Trevor intended to go to the media with his story, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive husband who'd abused his power and connections to destroy an innocent man. He'd even convinced himself that Linda would support his version of events. What Trevor didn't know was that Rob had been monitoring his every move, every conversation, every pathetic attempt at retaliation. When Trevor finally made his move, walking into the offices of the City Tribune with his story of abuse and corruption, Rob was ready. The journalist who met with Trevor, investigative reporter Marcus Fleming, listened to his story with apparent sympathy and interest. Fleming asked probing questions about Rob's business practices, his connections to law enforcement, his methods of surveillance and intimidation. This is exactly the kind of corruption our readers need to know about, Fleming assured Trevor. A wealthy businessman using his resources to destroy private citizens? That's front-page material. Trevor left the meeting feeling triumphant for the first time in days. Finally, he was fighting back against the monster who'd ruined his life. He had no idea that Marcus Fleming was one of Rob's oldest contacts, a journalist whose investigative work had helped Morrison Security Solutions expose corporate fraud for the past decade. Within an hour of Trevor's departure, Fleming was on the phone with Rob. You were right, Fleming said. He's exactly as stupid as you predicted. Walked right into it without questioning why I was so eager to hear his story. Good, Rob replied. You know what to do. The story that appeared in the Tribune 3 days later wasn't the one Trevor had expected. Instead of exposing Rob Morrison's alleged abuse of power, the article detailed Trevor Walsh's history of targeting wealthy married women, his pattern of financial manipulation, and his current federal investigation for fraud and conspiracy. The headline read, Local trainers scheme to seduce and defraud wealthy housewives exposed. The article included security footage of Trevor and Linda together, recorded conversations between them discussing their plan to take Morrison for everything, and financial records showing the systematic theft of marital assets. By the time Fleming was done, Trevor wasn't just humiliated, he was radioactive. Linda fared no better. The story portrayed her as the willing accomplice in a scheme to defraud her husband, complete with quotes from their recorded conversations and evidence of her attempts to turn their children against their father. The article made it clear that Linda Morrison wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator who'd been caught and was now facing the consequences. Emma Morrison read the article from her friend's house, her stomach churning with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. The world now knew exactly what kind of person her mother had become, but at least the truth was finally public. There would be no more pretending, no more lies, no more attempts to rehabilitate Linda's reputation. Tyler's reaction was simpler and more direct. When a classmate showed him the article on his phone during lunch, Tyler just shrugged and said, "My mom made her choices. Now she gets to live with them." The boy's casual dismissal of his mother's destruction would have seemed cold in any other family. But Tyler Morrison had learned from the master. His father had taught him that loyalty was earned, not inherited, and that betrayal had consequences. Linda's response to the article was exactly what Rob had predicted. Rage followed by desperation followed by a complete mental breakdown. She called the Tribune 17 times demanding a retraction, screaming at journalists about unfair treatment and biased reporting. She showed up at Emma's school trying to force a conversation with her daughter, only to be escorted away by security guards who'd been briefed on the restraining order. By the end of the week, Linda Morrison had become a local cautionary tale. The wealthy housewife who'd thrown away everything for a pretty face and ended up in federal court facing prison time. But Rob wasn't finished. Not even close. "Danny," he said during their evening briefing, "I want you to reach out to our contact in Phoenix. Trevor's brother needs to understand the full scope of his family's situation." "You want to destroy the brother too?" Danny asked. "I want to make sure Trevor understands that his actions have consequences for everyone he cares about," Rob replied. "He thought he could seduce my wife and steal my money without paying a price. He was wrong." Danny made a note in his file. "What about Linda's parents?" Rob's smile was colder than winter. "The Phillips family is about to learn some very interesting facts about their daughter's recent activities. I imagine they'll want to distance themselves from the scandal." As the plan moved into its final phase, Rob Morrison felt the familiar satisfaction of a job done thoroughly and completely. Trevor Walsh and Linda Morrison had tried to destroy him, and now they were learning what total destruction actually looked like. The difference was that Rob was a professional, and they were amateurs who'd brought knives to a gunfight. Chapter 8. No Mercy for Betrayers. The phone call came to Emma Morrison at 7 in the morning, 2 weeks after the Tribune article had destroyed what remained of her mother's reputation. Linda's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse from crying, desperate in a way that should have evoked sympathy from her daughter. "Emma, please. I need to see you. I need to explain what really happened." Emma stared at her phone, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "Mom, I know what really happened. The whole world knows what really happened. Your father is lying. He's manipulating the evidence, manipulating the media, manipulating you and Tyler. This isn't who I am, Emma. You have to believe me." For a moment, Emma almost felt sorry for her mother. Then she remembered the recordings, the surveillance footage, the months of planning to destroy her father. "Mom, I heard you. I heard you and Trevor laughing about taking Dad for everything he was worth. I heard you planning to use Tyler and me to testify against him in court. That was taken out of context. There is no context that makes it okay." Emma cut her off. "You tried to steal from our family. You tried to turn us against Dad. You chose Trevor over us, and now you're paying for that choice." The silence on the other end stretched until Emma wondered if her mother had hung up. When Linda finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. "So that's it. 20 years of being your mother, and you're just going to throw it all away." Emma's response was delivered with the kind of cold finality that would have made her father proud. "You threw it away when you decided to destroy our family for a man half your age. I didn't choose this, Mom. You did." After hanging up, Emma sat in her friend's bedroom and cried. Not for her mother, but for the family that could have been if Linda had just asked for a divorce instead of declaring war. Meanwhile, Tyler Morrison was dealing with his own confrontation. Linda had shown up at his school again, this time managing to corner him in the parking lot before security could intervene. "Tyler, baby, please just listen to me," Linda pleaded, her appearance shocking. She'd lost weight, her clothes were wrinkled, and her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. "Your father is poisoning you against me. This isn't who I am." Tyler looked at his mother with the kind of analytical coldness he'd inherited from Rob. At 14, he was already showing signs of his father's ability to see through emotional manipulation. "Mom," he said quietly, "I was there when you and Trevor talked about destroying Dad. I heard you. I saw the bank statements you tried to hide. I know exactly who you are." Linda grabbed his arm, desperation making her aggressive. "You don't understand. Your father is dangerous. He's destroying people's lives. He's protecting his family," Tyler finished, "which is what fathers are supposed to do." The boy pulled free from his mother's grip and walked away without looking back. Linda called after him, but Tyler had learned from his father that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was end a conversation permanently. That evening, Rob Morrison sat in his home office reviewing the latest intelligence reports on Trevor Walsh and Linda's deteriorating situations. Trevor had been arrested the previous day for trespassing after trying to break into his former apartment to retrieve belongings. Linda had been evicted from her motel for non-payment and was currently staying at a women's shelter. Both of them were facing federal charges that would likely result in prison time, and both had been abandoned by their respective families and support systems. In any other context, their situations might have evoked sympathy. Rob felt none. Danny knocked on the office door and entered carrying yet another folder. "Final phase is ready to execute. Are you sure about this one, Rob? It's going to be permanent." Rob looked up from his computer, his expression as unreadable as ever. "They made their choice when they tried to destroy my children's inheritance and turn them against me. Some betrayals don't deserve second chances. Even from your own kids if they change their minds later?" Danny asked. "Especially from my kids," Rob replied. "Loyalty isn't negotiable in this family. Emma and Tyler understand that now. If they ever forget, they'll end up like their mother." Danny nodded and left to implement the final phase of Rob's plan, a phase that would ensure Trevor Walsh and Linda Morrison would never recover from their attempt to destroy the Morrison family. The plan was elegant in its finality. Using his connections in law enforcement and the federal court system, Rob had ensured that both Trevor and Linda would receive maximum sentences for their crimes. Trevor would serve 8 years for conspiracy and fraud, while Linda would serve 6 years for theft and money laundering. But prison was just the beginning. Upon their release, they would find that Rob's influence extended far beyond the courtroom. Trevor would be unemployable in any fitness-related industry, his reputation so thoroughly destroyed that even minimum-wage employers would reject his applications. Linda would discover that her family had disowned her completely, her inheritance revoked, and her social connections severed permanently. Rob Morrison wasn't just winning the war. He was ensuring that his enemies would never have the resources to fight again. The final blow came through Emma Morrison herself, though she delivered it without fully understanding its significance. During a phone call with her maternal grandmother, Emma mentioned that she and Tyler would be taking their father's name exclusively, dropping the Phillips middle names that Linda's family had insisted upon. "We're Morrisons," Emma told her grandmother firmly. "Mom chose to stop being part of our family. We're choosing to make that official." The message was clear. Linda Morrison had lost everything: her husband, her children, her freedom, her family, and her future. She had gambled everything on destroying a man who was better at destruction than she could ever imagine, and she had lost completely. As Rob reviewed the final intelligence reports on his defeated enemies, he felt no satisfaction, no joy, no sense of victory. He felt the cold emptiness that came after necessary surgery. Something diseased had been cut away, and now the healing could begin. Emma and Tyler were safe. His business was secure. His enemies were destroyed. The Morrison family would survive, but it would never forgive. Chapter 9: The Price of Victory. 6 months after the midnight phone call that had started the war, Robert Morrison sat in his office reviewing the aftermath of his total victory. Linda had been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, her appeal denied, her reputation destroyed beyond recovery. Trevor Walsh had received 8 years and would likely serve every day of it, his good looks proving less valuable in a maximum security facility than they had been at the athletic club. Both of his enemies had been systematically erased from polite society. Their mutual destruction had been so complete that their names had become cautionary tales in the city's social circles, whispered warnings about what happened when you tried to steal from the wrong man. Rob should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt the hollow emptiness that came after completing a task that had required him to destroy everything he'd once cared about. Emma knocked on his office door and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that reminded him painfully of her mother during happier times. At 16, she'd grown into a striking young woman who carried herself with confidence that bordered on arrogance, a Morrison trait that served her well but worried her father. "Dad, we need to talk about Tyler." Rob looked up from his computer, immediately alert. Tyler had been quieter than usual lately, which in a Morrison man meant something was brewing beneath the surface. "What about him?" Emma sat down across from his desk, her expression serious. "He's angry. Not at Mom or Trevor, at you." This was unexpected. Tyler had been Rob's most loyal supporter throughout the war, never wavering in his support even when Emma had briefly struggled with conflicting loyalties. "Explain." "He thinks you went too far," Emma said carefully. "He understands why you destroyed Mom and Trevor, but he thinks 6 and 8 years in prison was excessive. He thinks you should have just divorced Mom quietly and moved on." Rob leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter. "And what do you think?" Emma's response was immediate and unflinching. "I think they're lucky they're only in prison. If they tried to steal from someone less civilized than you, they'd be dead." The casual brutality of his 16-year-old daughter's statement should have disturbed Rob. Instead, it filled him with pride. Emma understood the rules of survival in a way that Tyler apparently didn't. "Where is Tyler now?" Rob asked. "In his room." "Dad, he's been talking about going to live with Mom's parents when he turns 18. He wants to distance himself from what he calls the family business." Rob felt something cold settle in his chest. Tyler's potential betrayal hurt worse than Linda's actual one, because Tyler should have known better. The boy had seen what happened to those who crossed the Morrison family, and yet he was considering walking away. "Bring him to me," Rob said quietly. Emma hesitated. "Dad, he's still just a kid. Maybe give him some time to." "Bring him to me. Now." The tone of Rob's voice ended the discussion. Emma left to retrieve her brother, leaving Rob alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that his war against Linda and Trevor had claimed more casualties than he'd anticipated. Tyler Morrison entered his father's office 5 minutes later, his expression guarded but not hostile. At 15, he was already showing signs of the height and build that would make him formidable, but his eyes held a wariness that Rob had never seen before. "Emma says you want to leave," Rob said without preamble. Tyler met his father's gaze steadily. "When I turn 18, yes." "Because you think I went too far with your mother." "Because I think you enjoyed it," Tyler replied, his voice steady but sad. "I understood why you had to stop them. I even understood why you had to destroy them financially and socially. But you didn't stop there. You made sure they'd never recover, never have another chance, never find peace. That wasn't justice, Dad. That was revenge." Rob studied his younger son, seeing intelligence and moral conviction that reminded him uncomfortably of his own younger self, before the world had taught him that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Your mother tried to steal your inheritance and turn you against me," Rob said. "Trevor helped her. They planned to destroy everything I built for this family. What should I have done? Given them a timeout?" Tyler's response surprised him. "I think you should have been better than them." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly torn between loyalty to her father and sympathy for her brother's position. Rob felt the familiar coldness that preceded violence, but this time it was directed at his own son. Tyler was judging him, finding him lacking, preparing to abandon him just as Linda had. The betrayal cut deeper because it came from someone he'd trusted absolutely. "So you're choosing to side with your mother," Rob said, his voice flat and dangerous. "I'm not siding with anyone," Tyler replied. "I'm choosing not to become someone who destroys people for pleasure." The accusation hit Rob like a physical blow. Tyler wasn't just leaving. He was rejecting everything Rob represented, everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed to protect his family. "Then you've made your choice," Rob said with finality. "Just like your mother did." Tyler's face went pale as he understood the implications. "Dad, I'm not betraying you. I'm just..." You're choosing to believe that showing mercy to people who tried to destroy us makes you better than me. Rob cut him off. You're choosing to judge me for protecting this family. That's betrayal, Tyler. And in this family, betrayal has consequences. Emma tried to intervene. Dad, he's not. He's made his position clear, Rob said, his attention never leaving Tyler. When you turn 18, you're free to leave. But understand that if you walk away from this family, you walk away permanently. There won't be any college fund, any inheritance, any contact with Emma or me. You'll be as dead to us as your mother is. Tyler stared at his father in shock. You'd disown your own son for having a conscience? I'd disown my son for being weak, Rob replied. The world is full of predators, Tyler. Your mother and Trevor were just the latest ones to come for what's ours. If you can't understand why they had to be destroyed completely, then you don't understand survival. Tyler looked to Emma for support, but found only cold agreement in her eyes. His sister had chosen her side, and it wasn't his. Fine, Tyler said, his voice breaking slightly. But I won't become like you. I won't become someone who destroys people and calls it protection. Then you'll become a victim, Rob replied. And victims don't survive in the real world. After Tyler left the office, Emma remained behind, her expression thoughtful. Do you think he'll really leave? She asked. Rob stared out the window at the city he'd conquered through will and ruthlessness. If he does, he'll learn the same lesson his mother learned. The world doesn't reward weakness or moral superiority. It rewards strength and the will to use it. And if he comes back someday? If he realizes you were right? Rob's smile was colder than winter. Some doors, once closed, never open again. Tyler has 3 years to decide who he wants to be. If he chooses to be my enemy, he'll be treated like one. Emma nodded, understanding. The Morrison family had survived Linda's betrayal, but it had been forever changed by it. They were stronger now, harder, more ruthless, but they were also smaller. Rob Morrison had won his war completely, destroying his enemies and securing his empire. But victory had come at a price he was only beginning to understand. The boy from Riverside had always known that power required sacrifice. He'd just never imagined he might have to sacrifice his own son to keep it. As the sun set over the city that knew better than to cross Robert Morrison, the man who'd built an empire from nothing sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trophies of his victory and the ghosts of what he'd destroyed to achieve it. In the end, he'd kept his promise to never let anyone take what was his. But in protecting everything he'd built, he'd lost the very thing he'd built it for, his family. The war was over. Rob Morrison had won, and he would never forgive anyone who'd forced him to fight it. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.